Congressman Andy Barr was in WBON TV studios today to talk tax reform, the government shutdown, his re-election, and addiction. You can watch the full interview right here.
It's cold, it's snowy, and guess what? You do not need to be on your roof. Call Unlimited Roofing and they'll give you a totally free roof inspection for winter storm, hail, and wind damage. Call Tim Patrick or Danny Nutter. Now bundle up.
Fortunately, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer came to his senses and backtracked and reversed course and delivered the votes in the Senate to reopen the government. And it was a very unfortunate episode for the country, but I think the Senate Democrats learned an important lesson that not only is a government shutdown bad for our country, bad for our service members, bad for children who are denied health insurance over the weekend, and government services shut down, but it's really bad politics. What happens is when a political party votes to shut down the government, it hurts the American people. All of that was totally unnecessary, and it hurts the American people. So we're glad that Senate Democrats backtracked and decided to reopen the government. And now we can get back to the business of the American people. So we now have the opportunity to go back in good faith to the negotiating table to work on a long-term agreement to not only fund the government, but to address our broken immigration system and border security. Because House Republicans and the House of Representatives, we did our job. We not only passed all 12 appropriations bills on time, we did so ahead of schedule in September, all 12. We fully funded the government and we sent every one of those bills over to the Senate. And in November, well before the deadline, we reauthorized the child health insurance program in November, ahead of schedule, and we sent that over to the Senate. And so when people say, well, you control the government, what they're not getting is that the Republicans actually don't control the Senate. And a simple minority in the Senate blocked all of that. But it is important to point out that the House of Representatives, we did our job. We sent those bills over to the Senate, and the Senate couldn't get it done. It does create confusion out there when you hear liberal politicians or media commentators say, well, Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. Why is the government shut down? Well, it's because the Senate Republicans actually don't control the Senate because they operate in a rule of the minority kind of situation. Things have changed dramatically since the previous administration. We were suffering through the slowest, weakest economic recovery in American history. And now look at where we are. Unemployment at a 17-year low. Yes, it's part of it is the tax cuts, but also it's the regulatory relief where we have finally taken the boot of the federal government off the neck of the American worker and the American business. And finally, free enterprise in America is back. And the American business community is breathing a big sigh of relief, and that's why there's job creation, that's why there's growth, that's why there's consumer confidence, and that's why we're turning a corner. And we designed a plan to make a better way, is what we called it, a better way for a tax system for our country, where we were going to provide a simpler, more fair tax code for families and individuals and businesses, and we were going to make American businesses more competitive. And we were laboring under not only a complex tax code that costs Americans $400 billion a year just in compliance costs alone, but also the least competitive corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. And so what did we do? We lowered a non-competitive corporate tax from 35 to 21. We moved to a territorial tax system, and guess what the result is? The result is Apple announcing a couple weeks ago that they're going to pay a $38 billion tax bill to the United States Treasury in exchange for $250 billion in repatriation. All of that cash trapped overseas under our former broken tax code that politicians who were in charge before refused to fix. And for the first time in 31 years, we've moved to a system where all of those earnings are going to be able to come home, and those jobs and those higher wages are going to be able to take effect. And you see it in bigger paychecks. In fact, we still have a lot more work to do. I don't think we did enough in this tax reform, and we need to continue to move in the direction towards simplification. Our reform bill is terrific. It didn't simplify the code enough, in my opinion. It didn't cut taxes enough, in my opinion. So we still need to make progress, but keep making progress in the forward-moving direction, not the backward-moving direction. History suggests that the party in power loses seats in that first midterm election. I would also recognize and acknowledge that there's a whole lot of energy on the left. Liberal Democrats in our state and across the country, through their political activism, through their activities at my town halls and town halls of other Republican incumbents, it's pretty evident that they're still very upset about the results of last year's election. While we wanted the previous president to succeed, we don't think he did, and we think that agenda took the country backwards. So at the end of the day, all I can do is keep my promises. And I promised that I was going to run on this agenda that we're now enacting. I'm keeping my promises. I think the people that I represent would be scratching their heads if they said, well, why did he vote against repealing Obamacare? Why did he vote against tax cuts? Why is he voting against regulatory relief when that's what I campaigned on? And we won 3 consecutive elections. We respected the voice of the people who elected us. They knew what they were voting for. They asked me to support this agenda of regulatory relief, tax cuts, limited government, fiscal responsibility, cutting spending, rebuilding our military, fighting radical Islamic terrorism, and moving towards a healthcare system that puts doctors and patients in charge instead of bureaucrats. That was the agenda we ran on. And so to think that my votes now would be unpopular doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think it's less about me and me keeping my promises, that there is energy on the left in this cycle, and more about liberal activists not happy with the outcome of the election last year. And I would also say, you see a number of candidates on the Democratic side of the aisle running for office, and that reflects that enthusiasm on the left. One of the things that we're working on that I think is really important to Madison County and to, frankly, Estill County and all of the 6th congressional district is the work, and whether you're a Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, this matters to you, because we suffer from a very high drug overdose mortality rate in this area, and opioid addiction does not discriminate on political parties. So you'll be hearing some news this week and beyond about the work that we're doing to combat the addiction crisis in our country and in our district in particular. And we've been advocating with the new administration, with Secretary Ben Carson, for more resources for transitional housing. We've been advocating with the Department of Health and Human Services for better policies with respect to prescriptions and better training of physicians on how to avoid narcotics. We've been working with our law enforcement community on how to bring to bear more Drug Enforcement Administration resources, like we did here in Madison County with the HIDA program, to help our local law enforcement keep these toxic, poisonous drugs out of our community.
For more stories such as these, be sure to visit Richmond's very own WBONTV.com. I'm Marissa Heppel.